Welcome to the webinar on transparency regulations and achieving compliance on a global scale. We have a panel discussion by the way of the webinar today. We will cover a broad spectrum of topics. Today on global transparency, today's webinar is being presented by CoreData. CoreData is a global leader in transparency reporting, compliance analytics, and monitoring. I had conducted this panel discussion in June during a compliance conference in Chicago with pretty much the same group of panelists who are participating today. So it is my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. I have Kelly Toth joining us. She is an attorney and also has a master's in business administration by the way of training. Currently, Kelly holds the position of Director, Global Compliance, Transparency, Monitoring, Systems, Data, and Process Improvement at Zimmer Biomet. Kelly joined the Biomet Compliance Department in February of 2012 as a manager, transparency, and aggregate spend. She went on to hold the roles of manager and then director of global operations and transparency at Biomet. In 2015, Zimmer acquired Biomet, and Kelly joined the new Zimmer Biomet Compliance Organization as a director on the US and Canada team with responsibilities relating to transparency, distributor and sales compliance, HCP arrangements, and compliance systems. Kelly then took on her global director role with the compliance department. Prior to her work at Zimmer Biomet, Kelly practiced healthcare, tax, and technology law at Lewis and Capes, PC in Indianapolis. Before practicing law, she worked as a consultant for Deloitte in Chicago, specializing in hospital revenue cycle redesign and electronic medical records implementation. Kelly is married to Scott and has a 6-year-old daughter, Genevieve. The family keeps busy with travel, theater, cooking, and Genevieve sports. In addition to spending time with her family, Kelly enjoys Chicago Cubs and her alma mater, the University of Notre Dame. Kelly, welcome to the panel discussion. Attendees, I feel we are very fortunate for Kelly to join. Kelly has been part of several webinars, and she has been a regular feature, at least as long as I have been attending compliance conferences over the last 6 to 7 years at the compliance conference circuit. Again, Kelly, welcome. We also have, we also have Jackie Huber as our panelist. Jackie is a seasoned compliance professional with more than 20 years of experience in the life sciences industry. She has experience in all aspects of creating, implementing, building, and refining compliance programs for companies of different sizes. She has shepherded 2 global companies to successful conclusions of their deferred prosecution agreements, and she has worked collaboratively with independent review organizations under corporate integrity agreements. Her approach is marked by a strategy of embedding compliance controls into existing or new processes rather than tacking it on as an afterthought. She is currently the Chief Compliance Officer at Medacta US. She has held similar roles at Exactech and Biomet in the past and was also the Vice President Compliance for the Medical Device Manufacturers Association. She and her husband have 2 daughters. Jackie, welcome to the webinar. Again, very fortunate to have another very experienced and seasoned expert and professional in compliance with broad experience both in large and small to mid-size pharma. And that broad experience, I feel, would bring a lot of value and color to today's discussion, which in itself is covering a very broad subject matter. Before I kick off the session, I do want to share that Michelle Schaffenberg, who's a CCO, a Chief Compliance Officer at Cantel Medical, unfortunately could not join us today for the panel discussion. She had an engagement that came up late, but she has promised to join the panel on July 24th. I'll share more about that, and we'll have an opportunity to also poll her on these topics. So again, feel extremely fortunate and excited for today's webinar and panel discussion. As I said, we have two panelists who bring several years of excellent experience and knowledge of compliance. I'll also quickly share briefly about my background. I've been in the pharma industry for over 20 years. I worked for Wyeth Pharmaceuticals for around 10 years, and then I spent another 10 years with Eisai, Otsuka, and Schering-Plough. At two of those organizations, I was responsible in setting up, supporting, and deploying their transparency solutions. I've been part of Cordata as their partner and practice leader for pharma life sciences over the last 4 years, and I've had an opportunity, and I feel very fortunate for that, to discuss and speak with over 130 different device and drug manufacturers around their transparency, compliance, analytics, monitoring, and reporting needs. So with that, I would like to kick off the session and start with covering a few housekeeping items. First, Kelly, if you would like to quickly say hello to the participants, that'll also give me a chance to ensure that your audio is coming through clearly.
Hi, Ned. I'm here. Thanks for having me on the panel and putting this together.
Thank you, Kelly. And Jackie, if you won't mind saying hello to the attendees, and that would again give me a chance to confirm that your audio is coming through clearly.
Hello, excited to be here today and continue the discussion that we began at the conference in Chicago, and hope that it's of value to everybody.
Great. Thank you, Jackie. So quick housekeeping items. The agenda for today is we just completed the introductions. There are a few survey questions that I already have results from the conference, as well as another poll that was run that I'll share with you. And then all the attendees would have an opportunity to share some of their information or their interest in compliance topics that these survey questions cover. The results will be played back live immediately after the survey for all. That input would also be helpful for me and my panel participants to steer the discussion and conversation based on the responses you share. After that, I've put together a brief informational video on the global transparency journey. My experience is that organizations as well as individuals are at different stages of the journey to the life cycle of a global transparency capability. And this would help share and sort of level set the broader general understanding of some of the aspects to global transparency before we tee up the panel discussion. There are a few suggested topics that I had shared with the panelists. They're, of course, free and welcome to add other topics, expand on these topics. But the idea was to scope the topics into certain categories, and that's what we will look to do. And then we will have Q&A. The participants are welcome to ask questions throughout the discussion at any point in time. Those questions would come through to me, and I'll do my best to address as many questions as possible. As I said earlier, I feel that I'm very fortunate, and I feel that the participants will get a very comprehensive opportunity to understand these topics. So I do encourage all of you to share and ask as many questions as you possibly can to benefit from Kelly and Jackie's attendance today. Important disclaimers: the information, comments, content, and opinions expressed in this webinar reflect participants' own views in their personal capacity and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of their respective organizations. All materials have been prepared and all views shared are for informational purposes only and not for the purpose of providing legal, consultative, or regulatory advice and should not be treated as such. The information is shared with the participants for discussion purpose only and may contain copyright information. The information must not be copied, shared, or distributed. There is no express or implied commitment to the accuracy of the information. I suspect most of the participants have compliance backgrounds. So hopefully you appreciate the intent and the purpose behind these disclaimers. Couple other housekeeping items. All the mics for the participants are muted except for the panelists and mine, who's playing, which is the moderator. I invite your comments and questions. Please look at the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the speakers at any point, just type that in, and I'll try to pose it to our speakers at the time or hold it for a different portion of the event if the question is related to a later comment. We would rerun this webinar 2 more times to accommodate Pacific and EU time zones. During the reruns, the audience attending then would also have an opportunity to ask questions, and I will participate. So with that, I am excited to kick off the session. I want to start with this live polling survey. And I'll share, as I said, I'll share the results with all of you and the panelists immediately after the survey. The first question for survey is around your scope of responsibility as participants. The options are US and global transparency, US transparency likely to expand to global, US transparency only, non-US transparency only, or not applicable or other, depending on your role. So I will let my colleagues kick off the survey and ask the question. So we have completed the questions on the poll, and the results have come in, and I will momentarily share those results with the participants, as well as my panel members. So on the first question about scope of responsibility, 60% of participants expressed that they have US and global transparency responsibility. 15% have U.S. transparency responsibility likely to expand to global responsibilities. 15% have U.S. transparency responsibility only, and 6% have non-U.S. transparency responsibility, and 6% have other. They may be part of a different function or department. So that's that's pretty much consistent with what we saw at the conference and the pre-webinar poll. The next question was on key challenges in managing global transparency. And the results. Okay, so the participants were polling on that question. The options are stakeholder engagement, compliance organization structure, technology enablement, project setup and funding, staying current on regulations. So the results are coming in. Around 60% of attendees have put in their information, and we have the results, right? So the results suggest that 15% feel one of the key challenges is stakeholder engagement. 20% have expressed compliance organization structure as a challenge. 7% have shared technology enablement as a challenge. Project setup and funding is 7%, and around 52% have shared staying current on regulations. Based on the previous surveys that we conducted, the results are very comparable. The highest response was on staying current on regulations, around 40%, 41%, and around 50% today. So that continues to be a key challenge. And then the next one was compliance organizational structure at around 15% today, and then 20% or so in the past, followed by technology enablement. And I think these are topics that we get into with the panelists shortly. The next question is on what type of company do you represent? Device only, device and drug, biologics, device and biologics, all of the above. So various permutations on the type of products your company offers. Okay, so we have around 50% of participants who have voted in, and here are the results. So it looks like around 50% of you are part of a device-only company. The device and drug and biologics are split around 16% and 21%, and then there are 11% who are on three. So that's a nice diverse group that's participating today. That's helpful as we have tried to cover a broad spectrum of topics that relate to all three. The next question is around the size of your company, ranging from 100 million all the way to 5 billion plus. So the polls are open. If you could kindly share. That is the last question in this polling. And again, this would help us focus and steer the direction of the conversation with panelists based on your data. Okay, so the results are in. Around 16% of the participants represent companies with under 100 million in revenue. 30% have between 100 to 500 million, and then around 26% over a billion, and another 26% over 5 billion. So I think this is a nice cross section of large to small and mid pharma, drug and device, as well as biologics, which is excellent. A broad, diverse group is phenomenal. We are looking forward to your comments and questions. And with that, what I want to do is give the panelists a quick minute or two to share their sort of feedback or comments on the survey results. Kelly and Jackie, any comments or questions on your part?
Yeah, I think that this is Jackie. Those survey results are interesting and very helpful for us to know kind of where the audience is. The other questions now based on this that I wish that we would have added is the size of the compliance resources. That would be helpful as well, but that's fine. It's this data is helpful to know kind of where we are.
Excellent. All right, Kelly, any comments from you, or should we move to the a brief video?
I think what we're seeing here is similar to what we saw at the conference, and we're also seeing that there's quite a few small companies and there's quite a few large companies and fewer in between. Just an interesting.
Yep.
All right. So what I want to do is just to level set the participants' exposure and experience, as well as sort of knowledge for around global transparency. I will run through a brief video. I have abbreviated it, so I'll sort of ad-lib some of the video components in order to fit it into our time frame for this webinar. Well, global transparency journey, I believe, started with a few states in US, then expanded to US federal regulation in 2012, and since then it has mushroomed globally. Compliance organizations had to come up to speed without much of a runway on these mushrooming global regulations, and they had to find a way to stay current on all these changes and all these requirements that have come up globally. These all have also shown intense activity, and total spends amounts are fairly large. And what I believe this does is it requires thoughtful management and global information across large volumes of data spanning across multiple regions. So not just US and EU, but multiple regions, and not just spend, but also consent. And what that reflects is that transparency needs consent in many parts of the world. Consent then has necessitated needs for privacy management, data privacy management, and what that in turn has demanded is the compliance organization to provide guidance and management across continents, countries, with regional compliance representatives, country managers, and liaisons with various stakeholders and business partners. As a compliance team, there is now a need to understand and manage not just industry information, but analysis and information at company level, and not just locally, but also globally. And beyond just spend analysis and information, one needs to assess, evaluate, and analyze information at a more granular level, such as physicians, devices, drugs, and again, all of that at a global level. Compliance teams now need global reach, global support. And the question is, how do you manage this expansive and broad need for compliance management and support across multiple precincts? What do you need to cost efficiently manage global transparency, compliance, data privacy, information, and large volumes of data? We are certainly well beyond managing all this manually. The days of kickstarting a new spreadsheet and tracking issues and audits in a shared directory are truly in our rear view mirror. We are not just past the personal productivity tool era. We are entering the complex spectrum of data privacy, HIPAA compliance, GDPR, data backups, data security, disaster recovery, and image retention of paper documents across multiple countries and regions. This requires new strategies, approaches, plans, and capabilities for the compliance teams. Compliance teams are forced to proactively stay current on global regulations, link and integrate global results, manage broad capabilities, large teams, increasing stakeholder needs, and expectations of broader results. One needs to do all this in a proactive, timely, cost-effective, and efficient manner, or risk falling behind and exposing the organization to unexpected risks. Welcome to Global Compliance in 2019. With that, I want to kick off the panel discussion. And my first topic is on roadmap and scope for global transparency. So I would like to ask the panelists about their experience with transparency and its scope in general. At a recent conference, Rodrigo Groen, who's an executive director at America's Compliance at GE Healthcare, shared that in 2019, they filed over 70 transparency reports worldwide, and they expect that the number will increase nearly 25% in 2020. Could each of you share with the audience your journey around transparency, US or global, or both, scope of your organization's current obligations, and the roadmap you followed to be successful and effective in meeting these diverse transparency reporting obligations? Kelly, I would like to start with you first. If you could share a bit about your journey to the global transparency for the audience, I'll appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks, Ned. I started with transparency in February of 2012, and that's when I started working for Biomet, and I was brought on to build out the U.S. Open Payments or Sunshine Act reporting program at Biomet. So I put that program together, from a data collection system standpoint, process, organized all that. Moved on to some other responsibilities while retaining transparency reporting. And then with Zimmer and Biomet combining in 2015, transparency continued to be one of my obligations. Currently, the way we're structured, I have direct responsibility in a team who produces the U.S. Federal Open Payments Report as well as the U.S. state reports, and files some reports for other state requirements like Nevada and California. And then from a global perspective, we operate in more than 100 countries and do comply with global transparency reporting requirements. I act in an advisory capacity. We do have global shared services where we pull some of the data as well as from some of the compliance systems. And as new requirements come on, I work with local team members, depending on who we have there on the ground. Sometimes it's compliance, sometimes it's legal, sometimes it's finance, to ensure that we're complying with those requirements and getting those reports compiled. We do use local resources to do that who are familiar with local language and can support documentation as such. Excellent.
Thank you, Kelly. Jackie, if you want to share some of the challenges and your journey on the road to transparency for the participants, please.
Sure. My exposure to transparency really began around 2007, 2009 timeframe in the negotiation and ultimate resolution of the deferred prosecution agreement for Biomet, and the posting on the company's website of, at that time, just payments to consultants as part of the settlement of the deferred prosecution agreement with the orthopedic companies. That really led to the concept in the minds of Senator Grassley of the concept of, what transparency and what the Sunshine Act really meant for companies. And it began it planted the seed, I guess, that if the companies under the 5 companies under the non-prosecution and deferred prosecution agreements could do that relatively quickly, if they could post their consulting agreements or their consulting payments, then companies could disclose this. And we tried to make it clear that we had a long lead time to that. We knew that it was coming, and all we were posting was consulting payments, not every transfer of value, as what was clearly required by Sunshine and other relevant legislation that we now live under. So my roots in transparency go back a long time. So then fast forward to at the time when Sunshine really hit was when I was with Medical Device Manufacturers Association and was just counseling relevant industry groups as to how to prepare for and comply with the requirements. And now, thankfully, my role at Medacta is US only. So while other of my peers like Kelly and many of those people on the call are dealing with global requirements, while that's a requirement for the company as a whole, my requirements are really just in the US, and I'm thankful for that on a daily basis. So I just need to meet federal and the various state requirements in the United States.
Fair enough. Excellent. Thank you, Jackie. So just to quickly summarize, there were sort of 3 precursors to the open payments transparency reporting requirements in terms of experiences folks had. State reporting existed in small pockets, so there were compliance members who had experience with state reporting. As Jackie pointed out, deferred prosecution agreements or CIAs sometimes demanded specific transparency reports, and so that was another body of experience teams had. But by and large, the 2012 US Open Payments requirement, as Kelly pointed out, sort of leapfrogged the requirements, the needs, and the capabilities to produce transparency reports in US. And as the informational summary showed, that has since mushroomed at a global level. And as a result, we have over 80 plus registrants to today's webinar. We had over 50 participants, and we did run over time during the conference discussion on this topic, as well as a large number of compliance teams are now figuring out how best to manage from a simple state reporting just 5 or 7 years ago to now global reporting across very different landscapes, many different requirements, and many other organizational challenges. So Kelly and Jackie, thank you for your comments. And again, I encourage the participants to ask questions on this topic or other topics related to global transparency. I continue to feel very fortunate that we have a very powerful panel for today's discussion, and you have a great opportunity to ask them questions around approaches, solutions. If you are in the mix of figuring out a plan, an approach to meeting the global transparency requirements, you have an opportunity to ask folks with practical on-ground experiences to help you with that question. I want to next turn to the topic of organizational model. And what I want to cover is that based on my limited experience to around 100 or so different clients as well as advisory groups, there are 2 common models I've seen, especially with small to mid-sized pharma and device companies, to meeting their global transparency needs. One is a somewhat centralized model where the chief compliance officer staffs a regional compliance manager. That's the model on the left. And then the regional compliance manager uh, liaisons with one or more uh, stakeholders at a local country level and enrolls that liaison from the local country business team to act as the compliance point person at the country level. This is a centralized lean model. If you have a broader based sales team and broader based coverage for your products, you might have regional managers at EMEA, APAC, and LATAM, and others. So that's one option. A more resource intensive model that I've seen is for the CCO to staff both a regional compliance manager plus a compliance officer at each of the affiliate country, or at least at each of the larger affiliate countries. That's more of a decentralized model that's represented on the right. And then certainly larger organizations have more options that I've seen. If all else fails, they can bring matrix teams from various functions to assist. And lastly, to summarize, as Kelly and Jackie shared, I also first was exposed to transparency beyond the limited state reporting during the 2012-2013 journey for Sunshine Transparency Reporting. At the time, mid to large size farmers were really apprehensive about the extent of penalties that were introduced. CEOs were anxious. They definitely didn't want to get incarcerated. Those were some of the more invasive stipulations in the regulation. And when CEOs are anxious, CFOs find money. I was at one of the farmers at the time, and our budget for transparency reporting was set aside at $6 million. I was asked to ratify and review the proposal for the budget, and I, in all sincerity, asked the question, what will the compliance team do with the remaining 5.5 million? As I looked at the requirement then. Of course, many moons later, with a lot more innovation, a lot more experience, today companies can handle their US compliance reporting for small to mid-sized pharma at a fraction of that amount. I know that my colleagues here at Core Data have helped manufacturers with under $50,000 to meet their US transparency needs. So a lot has changed. With that, I want to ask my panelists to share what they have observed in the industry, in addition to their own learnings from their organizations, in terms of pros and cons of the various organizational models. And then I also, again, would like to invite the attendees to share some of their comments and experiences with various organizational models. So Jackie, I'm going to kick off with you first. I know you mentioned that you have broad-based responsibilities in the US and you have colleagues who are supporting some of your organization's global needs. So maybe taking that into account, if you could share how you are collaborating and partnering with your colleagues who have the broader global responsibilities along with your broad US responsibilities.
Yes. And I've worked in organizations that have really taken both of these approaches, whether it's centralized or decentralized. And I've got to say that I wouldn't say that one is necessarily better than the other. It's highly dependent on the resources within the organization, as well as I would say the I guess the personality, if you will, of the organization. The tendency for how it wants to operate. There are definitely pros and cons of both types of organizations, and there are ways in which both can function quite effectively. Again, based on the personality type, if you will, of the organization and how the organization functions effectively, whether it chooses to value the ability to make quick decisions at a local level, or if it values uniformity at the headquarter or central level. That's, I would say, would be the key determining factor as to which structure is going to suit the organization best.
Excellent. Thank you, Jackie. Kelly, your take on options for organizational model, your experience, and your sort of feedback or comments on pros and cons of the various models.
Sure. So I've had a lot of conversations with people about this. I think the overarching theme and the biggest thing I have to say is there is no perfect model, and nobody seems to have figured it out yet. This is a topic of discussion at every conference. You know, as we mentioned, there's pros and cons of centralized and decentralized. I think everyone is moving towards some sort of centralized management, but understanding that you need to have local resources. So you need to be somewhat decentralized in terms of having in-country resources on the ground who speak local language, putting the report together and perhaps submitting it. You know, obviously there's various submission methods, but then there's a lot of synergies that you can achieve with a centralized organization, whether it's just from a management perspective, whether you have like a global shared services where you're using the same travel and expense system like a Concur corporate-wide. It also depends on the number of ERP systems that you have and whether everything is in English or if it's in local language. I mean, that makes a big difference as well from a data pulling perspective. And whether or not your training and education group and clinical research groups, how you have those within your organization in terms of regional or global make a difference too, because it depends on how many places you have to pull data from as to what makes it or what method is most efficient for your organization. So I think the more decentralized an organization is and the less common systems and processes and policies they share, the more decentralized their transparency program is going to need to be. So I think as a lot of the companies get larger, you're seeing more of the centralization with understanding that throughout the organization, you're going to get those synergies by having more commonalities in terms of policies, procedures, and technology.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly. So just to quickly summarize both Kelly and Jackie's comments on this, they both shared that there is no clear single preferred model. They both offer pros and cons. There are certain commonalities in what Jackie and Kelly shared in their responses. One thing I heard clearly was that the decision for centralized versus decentralized was situational. Jackie mentioned that if you need quick decisions, you might favor local level presence. They also mentioned cultural aspects, language aspects that necessitate in-country resources. I heard that there is a general preference for centralized management for the synergy it brings. But as far as the local resources are concerned and teams are concerned, that is more situational. And then Kelly also pointed out around global shared services, centralized support, and common systems. If organizations have those, that gives them a better option with respect to centralizing. Otherwise, that sometimes offers up, if you don't have that type of global shared model, a need to address things more locally. So essentially, the compliance teams continue to reflect both types of models. And I presume for the sake of participants, you probably are seeing either, and if you are trying to set up an organization, I was in conversation with a team last week, and they were starting, and which is something I've seen with many other of my clients, with at least a regional manager, and then often those regional managers influence which way centralized or decentralized model goes. So Kelly and Jackie, thank you so much for input. Any additional comments?
Yeah, this is Kelly. I mean, one additional comment that I'm sure everybody is facing that I don't have a great answer to, though, is resources. So we've mentioned needing to engage local resources. Most of us aren't doing business in some of these smaller countries to a degree where we could justify a dedicated headcount to transparency in those countries. Unless my organization is unique, I'm not getting headcount for these. So that also complicates it. Figuring out who can do who those local resources are, and then working with what you can get them to do from a transparency perspective. And if it's managed, say, within compliance, sometimes it's easier if there are compliance resources there. But even if there are, in some countries, it's not so easy if it's not part of their official job duties, or you have to go through a works council or something. So there's just so many different things we need to consider as these requirements come out. And with our model, it's just tough, I think, sometimes.
Thank you, Kelly. Excellent point. Yes, some of the cons of this matrix form of business liaisons is that they have other responsibilities, and if compliance needs a certain level of dedicated commitment from the liaison partners, that is a challenge, and that then necessitates a decision on the part of the compliance team to consider dedicated compliance members, which is more of the decentralized model. But to Kelly's point, that is then challenged with your capacity from a budgetary standpoint. Excellent. I think those are challenges every organization continues to address. And bottom line is it's more situational, as both Kelly and Jackie pointed out. No clear winner, just some factors that might help you pick one or the other. Next, what I want to do is talk about operational effectiveness goals with respect to transparency. The script that I shared earlier with you indicated, and I expressed that there is a need to proactively, timely, cost efficiently, and uh, and effectively manage compliance in 2019 and beyond as the scope is increasing rapidly. I would like to ask both Jackie and Kelly about sharing their view on key operational effectiveness goals. I have teed up a few here, such as meeting regulations and risk management. That came up and continues to come up as the top topic in terms of staying current on regulations. Couple others that I'm suggesting that I've seen are stakeholder engagement, spend automation. So with that, I'm going to switch back to Jackie first on this question. So Jackie, your experience, critical success factors in making the transparency journey successful. You have a long experience in this space, as you shared, starting from 2007. So some key nuggets on what are some of the key operational effectiveness goals that you have seen and you have set up for your teams.
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting topic. And one of the survey questions earlier was so enlightening for me because when I think about what those challenges are, I rate stakeholder engagement much higher than a lot of the other respondents did. I think the highest by what I think 56% said that keeping abreast of changing regulations was a challenge, and certainly, or that was the highest ranking, and that is a big challenge. But for me, stakeholder engagement is always right up there, probably one or two for me. And one of the reasons is just as Kelly alluded to, if you're relying, our resources are stretched very, very thin, and we have to rely not just on our own headcount to get all the data that we're assembling, no matter what report you're talking about, whether it's, French Sunshine Act or, the Nevada filing, whatever particular transparency report you're talking about, data is coming at us and we're assembling it from a variety of resources, and these are not our direct headcount. So we're leveraging a number of resources, and these are people that transparency reporting is not their full-time job. So it's a tack on somehow. And I like to, for me, I like to build it into what they're already doing and some process that they're already assembling as much as possible. But getting them to care is a very real challenge. And explaining the the outcome of getting it wrong only goes so far. So trying to build in data, business data, business value to the data that we get helps. The earlier on a few slides ago, Ned, you showed some analytics, and bringing value to the company from the data helps, but trying to just get stakeholder engagement is really difficult. And if somebody out there has cracked that, I'd love to know how they do that. But that's always a challenge for me. Certainly, mitigating the risk of getting it wrong is a piece of that. But spend automation it's definitely a piece of the answer. About 8 years ago or so, in a meeting about best practices, a company that was much larger than the company I was with was doing this primarily through homegrown solutions. And that was a bit of an eye-opener for me. And it made me feel better about doing a part of it through whatever homegrown solutions make sense for your organization. But we both entities ultimately also felt that it was necessary to use some vendor approaches and automate where it makes sense, because the regulations are just constantly changing, and to do it completely in-house, I just found was not sustainable, because I was never going to have enough dedicated IT resources to continue to update whatever tool we were trying to customize to fix it. So partnering with and I'm not endorsing any one tool necessarily, but partnering with whomever makes sense for you, so that you can stick to the business that is your business, and meeting the needs of these regulations as efficiently and effectively as possible just became critical for me, so that I wasn't really handicapping my compliance department to do just transparency reporting, because then I was ignoring everything else that I had to do to really serve my organization well. So that was a really long-winded answer, but those are my thoughts about operational effectiveness.
Excellent. Thank you, Jack. I appreciate the detail because this is a complex aspect. You only can have a few top priorities in managing the effectiveness of the operation. So appreciate the detail. Kelly, any additional thoughts that you have on operational
I think
effectiveness?
Jackie covered it pretty well, so I'll keep it quick for time's sake. I think the theme that I was hearing from Jackie and what I hear in my organization is do more with less. So part of our effectiveness goals are to look for continuous improvement in terms of maintaining, our data accuracy, which is pretty good in data validation, but also, from a stakeholder engagement and analytics perspective, deliver something to the rest of the organization, and again, do it with fewer resources. So our spend automation is important, our systems are important, and we're looking at perhaps using RPA for some of our repetitive tasks to further gain some efficiencies.
Excellent, thank you. So just to quickly summarize, I heard a few key nuggets. First one is that stakeholder engagement remains a top priority in managing the effectiveness, because as Jackie pointed out, that you are partnering with resources where transparency is not their top job. So you have to keep an eye on that aspect to manage it successfully. Kelly sort of seconded that. Both Kelly and Jackie talked about spend automation, um, stable analytics, and systems to support transparency, and then also continuous improvement. Thank you. That was excellent. Appreciate it. Um, on the topic of reporting updates, there are several aspects. The first two is what I would like to draw your attention. Part of the reason is that Kelly and Jackie, you saw that nearly 60% of survey respondents said that to stay current on regulations and understanding and knowing the laws and regulations is one of their key challenges. And we heard the same from during the conference. So maybe if I could steer you to that one topic and hear your approaches in staying current on regulations. I know we are coming up on the hour, so if I could poll you each for a minute or two on that topic, I'd appreciate that. So Kelly, if you want to start first, please.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Can you repeat that, Ned?
Sure. So there was a pretty broad feedback on the survey around need to stay current on regulations. And my ask is if you could share how you and your team stays
Sure.
current on regulations and laws.
Okay. So we have a combination method kind of put together out of necessity. I have things as simple set up as Google alerts that show me some of these new regulations that are coming. We also engage with King and Spalding as our outside counsel, and we receive updates from them. We have an internal government affairs department, and we had a U.S. dedicated Sunshine Act person who was monitoring those laws that I asked to also monitor global transparency. We use, and I don't know if you want us to use vendor names, but it is free and out there. So PwC, I read the information that they put out. I've seen IQVIA put information out, as well as myself and a few others attend conferences, so we try to stay up to date from our peers in that way. So it's a collaborative effort. The regulations are coming out so fast and furious that I don't think I'd be comfortable only having one method.
Good. Excellent. Jackie, anything you would like to add?
No, Kelly covered it.
All right, thanks. I know we have just a minute or two left, so I want to cover the last topic around operational challenges. I won't steer those to any one or two topics that are listed, but if you could share maybe one key operational challenge that you have had with transparency reporting and a little bit of comments on that challenge, I'd appreciate that. Jackie, if you would like to respond first, please.
Wow, only talk about one operational challenge?
Maybe a couple.
Again, my primary operational challenge is really stakeholder engagement and, just making people outside of compliance really care about this because it feels so distant for them. That's probably my primary one. Beyond that, it's just when you're in the middle of it, really, managing all of the data and not getting too bogged down in the weeds. I guess that's not a very satisfying answer. I'm sorry.
No, it's clear. I follow. There's a lot of data to manage. Appreciate that. Kelly, any feedback from you in terms of your key challenges?
Sure, and I think Jackie covered it well. And unfortunately, you wouldn't think 7 years into open payments we still have this issue, but it is. She called it stakeholder engagement. It's getting people who are providing some of the data to provide clean data for me. Getting them to care about selecting, using search and selecting the proper HCPs so we're not reporting on the wrong ones. and, for other types of data collection, filling out all the information we need, that still, can be a bit of an issue. Also, from an organizational perspective, the number of different ERP systems and some regional processes from a global perspective make it difficult, as well as the requirements themselves, and continually educating people in the different regions and even in the compliance organization and transparency of what is required where. People tend to take at least around here, a US-centric view, which works from a spend and is probably overbroad from a spend perspective, but it also means people forget about the requirements to perhaps report quarterly or to report contracts, and to report spend to non-MDs and non-state specific resources, for instance, some of the global requirements that include some government officials, hospital boards, etc. So I know that's also more than one, but those are all weighing heavily, I think, on my mind from an operational perspective.
Fair. But suffice to say, very broad challenges. The organizations, and as Kelly, you pointed out, we have covered some of those challenges over the time through experience. But to Jackie's point, we're still dealing with some of the more core challenges of stakeholder engagement, data errors, data corrections, and like. So both Jackie and Kelly, really appreciate your input. I think our participants had a great opportunity to hear firsthand with folks who have a lot of on-ground experience. They have worked on various angles and various aspects of transparency. So participants, hopefully you gained insight on some of the aspects, challenges, opportunities, approaches, and the methods. I did get a few questions that were on the new regulations coming up. I will share those with both Jackie and Kelly to see if they have any comments. But those were more specific to regulations at a specific country or precinct. With that, I know we are a couple of minutes over. I still have around 60 to 70% of attendees with me. I want to give Kelly and Jackie both an opportunity to add any last comments, and certainly thank them for excellent participation, phenomenal input, and making the time for the compliance professionals who joined the webinar today to learn and benefit from their experience. So Kelly and Jackie, I want to give each of you a minute or so to add any comments before I close out the webinar. Kelly, maybe you want to go first.
Sure, thanks, Ned. This is a topic that most of us could probably spend hours on, so I know it was a very quick 1 hour. We had a lot to cover. If there's any benchmarking you want to do or questions, or anything anyone would like my input on, I am on LinkedIn, so feel free to contact me there. And I appreciate everybody joining this discussion and submitting questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly. Jackie?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn as well. And I guess my closing comment would be there were a large diversity of companies represented on the call, and some really, really big and some smaller companies. And, I guess my word of encouragement would be to not despair about where you are on the spectrum, and to try to use your resources as effectively as possible, and just do the best you can.
Excellent. Thank you again, Jackie and Kelly. And just to close out, we have another part to this discussion on July 24th at 11 a.m. Eastern. Michelle, who is the Chief Compliance Officer at Cantel Medical, could not join today. She will be part of that panel. With that, I want to close out the webinar and again thank our panelists, Jackie and Kelly, for their tremendous input and participation. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.